Okie dokie, back here on my porch in South Minneapolis, and I've solved the noise issue. A few of my previous videos had a issue of a lot of street noise. I just closed the windows, the storm windows on the porch, so you won't be hearing so much street noise on this video. The title of this video, I think, is that Wonder Woman was never a great character. There's multiple reasons for that, but people talk about Wonder Woman because of all the hype about the movie as if, wow, she's this great iconic female superhero. Wonder Woman was never a great character. But let's get into a little bit of the history of Wonder Woman. And this may come as a surprise to many people, but DC Comics wasn't actually named DC Comics until 1977. It always carried the DC slug on its cover, so a lot of people thought it was named DC Comics going way back before then. But it was actually started as a company called National Allied Publications by a very colorful character named Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, and he was a very colorful character, and he was willing to risk his money in an unproven venture like comics. And I should tell you, in parentheses, that DC Comics was one of the first comics under Wheeler Nicholson to publish original material, because the very first comic books were actually reprints of newspaper comic strips. But Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson reasoned, and he was very prescient, that the public didn't care, they just wanted to read comics. So he decided to start a comic that would have all original material, and most people laughed at him the way they laughed at Walt Disney when he built Disneyland. They said who would pay for a comic magazine that didn't have any familiar characters in it, you know. But he proved them wrong, and he started a company called the National Allied Publications. And then he brought in a partner named Donenfeld. I don't remember all the first names, so I'm doing this off the top of my head. But and then Donenfeld later brought in another partner named Leibowitz, and then Leibowitz and Donenfeld wound up buying out Major Wheeler Nicholson. So then they brought in a fellow named M.C. Gaines, and M.C. Gaines shared office space with Donenfeld and Leibowitz, and they shared a lot of the same employees, but M.C. Gaines was actually packaging a separate line of comics, and M.C. Gaines' comics were called All-American comics. And these were actually two separate lines of comics for 5 years. And it was All-American the Donenfeld-Leibowitz national publications had, their big star was Superman. And then they created a second big star with Batman. When M.C. Gaines came in, the superhero trend was in full swing, and he wanted to have his own superheroes. So the M.C. Gaines line of All-American comics, they created the Flash, and they created Green Lantern, and they created Wonder Woman. And then eventually, after a period of years, they merged the two lines. They just decided that we're all going to be one company, and they formed some sort of partnership agreement. And so National Publications, which later changed its name to National Comics, and then later in 1977 changed its name to DC Comics, got ownership of Wonder Woman and Flash and Green Lantern after being run as a separate line of comics for like the first 5 years or so of their existence. So that's just a little backstory there on that. And actually, if you read DC Comics in the 60s, you would have thought that their name was DC Comics, but then if you looked inside on the fine print on the indicia there, which is what we call that in publishing, if you looked at the indicia, you would have seen that it said in there National Comics was still the name in the 60s. So a little backstory there. So let's get to the point of why Wonder Woman was never a great character. Okay, the first reason that Wonder Woman was never a great character is because she doesn't result from the inspiration of an artist or a writer who suddenly thinks, I have a brilliant idea. It's like Captain America, let's make a patriotic hero. You know, the Submariner, let's make a hero that can breathe underwater and is like the king of Atlantis. These are like great ideas. You know, Superman, let's make an indestructible character from space who can fly and do all these wonderful things. These are great ideas. You know, Batman was taking the pulp theme of like characters like the Shadow and the Spider and applying it to like a masked detective. Like the very famous pulp character, the Phantom Detective, was a detective who wore a mask on the covers. He probably didn't wear it very much on the inside. But so great characters come from great ideas. In the case of Wonder Woman, there was no great idea. There was a decision, it was almost like a decision made by a committee, that we need to have, MC Gaines basically said, well, we need to have a female hero. Anybody got an idea for a female hero? Looking all around, anybody got an idea? No? No good ideas? Well, let's just cook up something. That's not how you get good characters, is by just forcing it and cooking up something. So Gaines hired a psychiatrist who had written about things from what you would now call, I guess, a feminist perspective, even back in the 40s. And so this was before there was such a title as feminism, I guess. But he hired a psychiatrist, and his name was William Moulton Marston. Marston. Let me check my notes and make sure I have that name right. I made a few notes off the internet. Yeah, Marston with a T. Moulton Marston. And I think Gaines hired him because he was very into what we would now call women's lib or women's issues. And he was a psychiatrist, so Gaines probably felt, well, this guy will know how to get little girls to be interested in this comic, because superhero comics were perceived at the time as having their biggest readership among children. And they did a huge readership among children. They also had a huge readership among adults. And in fact, here's a fun fact for your history buffs, is that when Stars and Stripes actually polled the GIs that were fighting in World War II and asked them which magazines would they like to have included in care packages from home, the #1 request on that poll was for Superman comics. So that just shows you that even though there was a perception that superhero comics were big with children, and of course they were, children did read them, there were also quite a few adults reading them. And so these young men, the World War II veterans, were much older than the group that fought in Vietnam and other places. I think I read somewhere that the average age of a person fighting on our side in World War II was 27. And you can double check me on the internet, but it was fairly old group of young men, old young men. But yeah, so getting back to hiring William Marsden, the first reason that Wonder Woman's not a good character is that William Marsden was this very, very kinky person, and he put a lot of his personal kink into the strip. And I mean, if you wanted to be judgmental, you could call William Marsden a pervert. I'm not going to call him a pervert, but we're all supposed to be very non-judgmental these days. But William Marsden was very into S&M. He was very into bondage. He actually wrote about bondage, I think later in his life, after getting the job to do Wonder Woman. But he actually wrote about how everyone, he felt, should be tied up, that's how you experience your true self, and that's how you have these revelations as to what you're really all about, is by being tied up and being helpless. And I guess he also liked to tie up other people. And he was in a he was married, but he was in a relationship, a threesome sort of relationship, with his wife and another woman. The other woman, who I believe was named Olivia or Olive, I think Olivia, has been described by historians as being both Marsden's mistress and his wife's lover. So these three would get together and have their threesomes and tie each other up into various configurations and do various kinky things to each other. Well, Marsden couldn't resist putting some of this into the comic, and you may have noticed that Wonder Woman has a rope, which is like a sacred or magic rope, which compels you to be truthful when you are tied in it. So that's very much in line with Marsden's idea that you could experience your true personality by being tied up in a sexual way. And actually, if you look at, I saw someone that once did an analysis where they went through the Golden Age Wonder Woman and counted all the panels that Wonder Woman is in, and then counted the number of panels where Wonder Woman is tied up or has someone else tied up. And according to this person's count, 25% of the panels that Wonder Woman is in, someone is tied up in. 1/4 of all the panels. So let's just say that bondage was a reoccurring theme throughout the original run of Wonder Woman. And Marston didn't stop there as far as putting his own personal stuff into the strip. The reason Wonder Woman has silver bracelets that she uses to deflect bullets is because Olivia, who was his lover and his wife's lover, always wore these big silver bracelets, and the Wonder Woman's silver bracelets were directly taken from that. So Marston couldn't resist putting his own kink in. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that Wonder Woman is a hodgepodge, a mishmash, a mixed bag. Describe it how you want. Wonder Woman is your classic character invented by a committee of people. It's almost as if nobody was in charge and they just kept every idea that was thrown out there during a brainstorming session. Because when you think about it, here's a character released during World War II. They put a red, white, and blue patriotic costume on her, and yet she's not American. You know, she's from an island of women. She's an Amazon. So she's an Amazon from an island nation. She's not an American, but she wears a red, white, and blue patriotic costume. She has an American eagle on her chest. She's not an American. She's portrayed sometimes on the cover as like fighting Nazis, but in her stories she really doesn't fight very many Nazis. You know, she's not really a wartime character in any real sense of the word. I mean, she's a wartime character, but she doesn't fight the Nazis every story the way Captain America does. Let's put it that way. So yeah, red, white, and blue character who's not an American. She has a magic rope. She has I don't know if you call them magic, but she has special bracelets. Okay. She's super strong. She has an invisible jet. Do you see where I'm going here? None of these things really go together. None of them resemble anything that could be called a theme. You know, I mean, it's like if you have a super cowboy and he rides a robot horse, just to pick something out of the thin air. That's at least a theme. You know, horses, it may be a robot horse, but horses go with cowboys, you know. Whereas if you have a super cowboy and he rides a Volkswagen, there's no theme to that, okay? Everything about Wonder Woman is not thematically linked in any way. It's just a mixed bag of things. She's an Amazon, she's pro-American, she's super strong, she has magic wristbands, you know, she has a magic rope, she flies an invisible jet. There's nothing holding that together. So that's the second reason why she was never a great character, because she's a mixed bag, frankly. Very severely mixed bag. The third reason she's not a great character is because her art was never good. Okay, now the artist's name was Harry Peter. I'm not making that up, and I hope that that's his real name. I hope that that wasn't what he thought was a funny name for a comic that's supposed to appeal to girls. But you know, let's assume it's his real name. Okay, Harry Peter is nobody's favorite Golden Age artist. Nobody. I mean, and if I was to list the top artists of the Golden Age, I can guarantee you Harry Peter would not be in the top 20. Okay, if I just started listing artists from the Golden Age that I think is better than him from the same era, you know, not from other eras. I mean, I would start with Simon and Kirby, obviously better. You know, Lou Fine better, Mac Rayboy better, you know, pick a name. Bob Powell is better, Fred Gardenier is better, you know, Jack Cole is unbelievably better, Basil Wolverton is better. You know, I mean, you could literally throw out any name from the Golden Age, and you know, I'm trying to think of what's the name of the guy that did the Phantom Lady. Ugh. Anyways, I can't. It's hard to think of names off the top of my head, but every Golden Age artist is basically better than Harry Peter. I mean, not everyone, but everyone that you've heard of that's a name artist is better. And Harry Peter is not even a well-regarded name. He's not even well-remembered outside of people who are particular fans of Wonder Woman. He's a completely forgotten name outside of his connection to the fact that Wonder Woman managed to stick around for a long time. So the art is not good. I mean, Harry Peter's art is, the women are very masculine looking. The action is very stiff. It doesn't flow. It's very, it just has a whole constipated feel to it that is awkward and weak and kind of flat and storybook looking and not at all dynamic like you'd see on a Simon and Kirby comic. You know, the guys that did Superman are better artists. The guys that did Batman, I mean, Bob Kane was not a great artist, but he was better than Harry Peter, and he became better. And Jerry Robinson's certainly much better than Harry Peter. So it's not great art. I mean, and the writing by the psychiatrist, Dr. William Moulton Marsden, was mediocre. He was not a comic book writer. He was not good at writing comic book stories. If you want to see good Golden Age comic book stories, go with any Simon and Kirby story. They always came up with good stuff, even when they used other script writers. But if you really want to see a master create a story, you go to like Will Eisner on The Spirit, or you go to like Jack Cole. I've recently on the Comic Digital Library, which is a free source on the internet for reading old public domain comics, and everybody should use it. But I've been going to Smash Comics and reading the Midnight episodes by Jack Cole, and they're absolutely brilliant. They're so entertaining, and they're so far beyond what a psychiatrist like Marston was capable of writing. So his stories weren't interesting. And one way that you can tell that it's not just my opinion that his stories weren't interesting is because interesting heroes have interesting villains. Okay, everybody can name Batman's rogues gallery. You know, I mean, Joker, Riddler, Penguin, Catwoman, Two-Face, you know, Scarecrow, Clayface. You know, go right down a list of the more modern characters like Mr. Scarface and Anarchy and Killer Croc, and you know, you go on naming Batman villains. You know, Superman. Who's your favorite Superman villain? Lex Luthor? Is it Brainiac? Is it Mr. Mizzle Spitlick? Is it Bizarro Superman? Is it, you know, Metallo? Or is it the Parasite? Who's your favorite Flash villain? Is it Kronos the Time Thief? Is it Vandal Savage? Weather Wizard? Captain Cold? You know, Captain Boomerang? You know, you could just go on naming villains in Flash Rogues Gallery. You know, who's your favorite Spider-Man villain? Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Sandman, Shocker, Electro, Mysterio, Kraven the Hunter, the Lizard. You get my point. Great characters have great villains, you know. Now quick, who are your top 5 favorite Wonder Woman villains? I'll wait. Just shout them out anytime you're ready. Ares, yeah, Ares, that's one villain that was just lifted, whole cloth, just lifted out of Greek mythology, not changed at all, and depicted as being a big, burly, beefy guy, muscle-bound guy wearing Roman centurion-style armor. Not a great villain, but at least we can remember one villain. Oh, and Cheetah. Can't forget Cheetah, the Vegas showgirl in the cheetah costume. She looks like a Vegas showgirl. I guess she has cheetah powers. Cheetah is primarily remembered for being a cute, good girl design, you know, not because there was anything special about the character. The only reason Cheetah is remembered is because Wonder Woman is so weak on interesting villains. Frankly, beyond Ares and beyond Cheetah, I can't think of a Wonder Woman villain. And I was literally, before I turned on this camera, racking my brains trying to see if I could come up with one. And I can't think of one. You know, I mean, the reason she has such a weak rogues gallery is because she's had such weak writing for much of her career. And if you wanted another reason why Wonder Woman was never a great character, well, let's just get into some facts here, because I looked some things up. You know, the internet is the world's greatest research tool, and mostly what we do is look up videos of kittens and pictures of Kim Kardashian's butt, but you don't have to just use it for that. You can actually use it to research real things. So let's just get into a few sales figures here. Okay, In the night from the year 1960 on until the mid 80s, we have very accurate sales data on comics because, excuse me, there was a postal regulation that went into effect that said if you're going to essentially, I think I have this right, if you're going to sell mail order subscriptions, you have to report your circulation data, and they had to publish it in a little box in the book, like periodically. So there's very good sales figures. I'm not sure if they changed the law in the 80s or if it was just a matter of companies stopped offering mail subscriptions, so they stopped putting in, having that information available. For whatever reason, the good data is between the 60s and the 80s. So let's just, we can speculate about what the sales figures were from earlier in her career. We do know that Wonder Woman is one of 3 comic strips that had superheroes published by DC or National during the 50s that survived the big fallout from the comic book witch hunt of the 50s, the Comics Code fiasco. If you don't know about that, you need to, we'll maybe do another video on that someday. But so it was one of the 3 that survived. But I should also point out that Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman are not exactly equal, because Superman and Batman both appeared in multiple comics in the 50s, and all the Superman comics survived. Like Superman is, in Superman he's also in action, he's also teaming up with Batman in World's Finest. Batman's in Batman, he's also in Detective, and he's also in World's Finest. So Batman and Superman essentially had 3 comics each, or 2.5 each, and Wonder Woman had 1. So, but let's take a snapshot here from the year 1968, okay? 1968, there were 59 comics reported on the sales data. Now the Harvey comics, the Casper the Friendly Ghost, Richie Rich, all that stuff, the entire Harvey line, there's no data on. So apparently they didn't sell mail order subscriptions. So, but we can assume that the entire Harvey line was above Wonder Woman. Why do I say that? Because in 1968 there were 59 comics that we have sales data on, and out of 59 comics, Wonder Woman was number 50. Okay, number 50. Okay, Wonder Woman in 1968 was number 50 with a circulation of around 166,000. Okay, number 1 comic was Superman with 636,000. Number 2 comic was Archie Comics with 566,000. Now think about this for a moment. Archie Comics co-stars who? Betty and Veronica and Jughead, but Betty and Veronica, 2 girls. It's a comic that sells primarily to girls. Okay, it was primarily girls that read Archie. And Archie was the number 2 seller overall in 1968, with 500,000 copies of his flagship title being read, Archie, 566,000, compared to Wonder Woman's 166,000. That means that Archie was selling 400,000 copies a month more than Wonder Woman. But actually, it's a lot worse than that, because overall, there's Archie Comics, the publisher, published 11 titles. Okay, 11 titles. And with the exception of Archie, well, actually with no exception, I mean all the titles. I was going to say Little Archie is an exception, but then Little Archie, it's the same cast. It's basically 11 titles. I guess you could say Archie's Madhouse didn't really feature the same cast, but it's basically the same cast in 10 titles, and Betty and Veronica are in all of them basically, and it's the same group of kids. The Jughead strip puts a little more focus on Jughead, and the Archie puts a little more focus on Archie, but how can you do an Archie story without Betty and Veronica? It's almost impossible. So yeah, Archie had 11 titles, and they were all above Wonder Woman, and they all sold primarily to girls. Okay, so Archie was number 2, Batman's number 3, Superboy's number 3, 4. World's Finest, the team-up comic for Batman and Superman, was number 5. Now get this, Lois Lane, a comic with a female in the lead that's connected to Superman, Lois Lane was the number 6 seller with 461,000. That's almost 300,000 more than Wonder Woman, who's down at number 50. Jimmy Olsen is number 7, Action is number 8. Betty and Veronica, in their own title, comic for girls, number 9. So Adventure number 10, Tarzan. The Dell comic is number 11. This is interesting. The top selling Marvel comic in 1968 was Spider-Man, and it was number 12 on the list. Spider-Man, Marvel had nothing in the top 10. A lot of comic fans think of the 60s as being the Marvel explosion, which it was. It totally was. And artistically and creatively, Marvel comics were exceptional in the 60s. But sales-wise, not so much. DC was still very much dominating the top 10. And what were they dominating it with? Almost every DC comic in the top 10, almost all of them, are related directly to Superman or Batman, or the supporting cast of Superman. So yeah, DC, this has always been DC's problem, is that they were very successful with Superman and Batman and very incapable of moving on and translating that success into their other comics. But so let's see if there's any more interesting data on here. Oh, there's only 59 comics on the total list. Wonder Woman is 9 comics from the bottom. The bottom 6 comics on that list are all from Charlton. Now, it really is unfair that Charlton is the bottom 6, because the fact is we don't know what Charlton comics would sell. They might be selling a lot higher than that if Charlton had better distribution. Charlton was a company that did not have as good a distribution to the retail outlets where the comics were sold as some of the other publishers. So the fact that Charlton was the bottom 6 spots on the list is not necessarily a reflection on their quality, although they were definitely a lower quality publisher, I would say. But if they had distribution equal to DC, their comics wouldn't necessarily be the bottom 6 on the list. So yeah, out of 59, if you were to exclude the 6 Charlton titles on the list, then there's really only 4 titles that are underneath Wonder Woman. So that's quite stunning. That's a 5-minute warning. And all the titles that were underneath Wonder Woman, that besides the Charltons, they're all DC titles, and every one of them was an anthology comic without a leading character, a comic like Tales of Mystery, for example. These are comics that they're hamstrung by the comics code. They can't show gore or horror, and it's like a pseudo-horror comic. It's like a horror comic that's not allowed to sell anything, to show anything scary, basically. So it's no surprise that a comic like Tales of Mystery or a comic like Tales of the Unexpected, which are pseudo-horror comics that aren't scary and have no lead character, it's no surprise that those comics would be underneath Wonder Woman. It is a surprise that Wonder Woman would be all the way down there with them. And let me just point out a few of the comics that were higher than Wonder Woman in 1968. Nightwing. There was a Nightwing comic that was higher in 1968. Oh no, wait, that's not from 68, excuse me. Okay, let me back up here. Let's go back to 1960. I said that Wonder Woman in 1968 had 166,000. I want to point out that in 1960, when they first started collecting the data, she had a readership of 213,000, and she was number 25 on the list. Now, in 1960, there were fewer comics published. There wasn't a list of 59. It was a much smaller list. But still, she was doing much better. She had about 50,000 more readers in 1960 and had lost 50,000 readers by 1968. Okay, the last year that we have really good solid data on is 1984. Okay, in 1984, from 166,000 in 1968 to 1984, she has 52,000. Okay, so she only has a quarter of what she had in 68 in 1984. Now, I looked up some data on 2017, and I can tell you that in 2017, these are estimated sales. This isn't as solid of data as we had from the Postal Service, the circulation figures. But the estimated sales from 2017 ranked Wonder Woman 31st overall. Okay, given that this is the year that her movie comes out, given all the hype surrounding her movie, that her comic is ranked 31st is not impressive. Okay, her comic was ranked 31st in 2017. Estimated sales 64,000. 64,000. Did you know in the 1950s, before the Comics Code debacle, publishers would routinely cancel books that had less than 200,000 in circulation. That's true. They would routinely cancel them. They were considered failures. But today, we have many comics that are under 100,000. It's sad the way the comic business has been totally mismanaged. But just let me tell you a few of the books in 2017 that are beating Wonder Woman. Nightwing, the grown-up Robin, is beating Wonder Woman in 2017. Jessica Jones, character no one cares about until she went on Netflix. Jessica Jones is beating Wonder Woman. Miniseries starring Deadpool is beating Wonder Woman. Star Wars, the venerable Star Wars comic, is beating Wonder Woman. You know, how many years, I mean, Star Wars came out in the 70s. So, I mean, at this point, Star Wars is like, you know, almost a 40-year-old franchise, or probably more than 40-year-old franchise. So, these are things that are beating Wonder Woman right now today. So, she's never been great in sales. She hasn't, at least she hasn't been great in sales for a long time. 1968 was more than 40 years ago, and in 1968 she was 50th in sales among a list of 59. And like I said, she was actually lower than that, because I know that every single one of those Harvey titles, Richie Rich, Casper, Sad Sack, Hot Stuff, all those titles would have been higher than her if they were listed. So yeah, this is my basic rap about Wonder Woman not being a great character. Let me just say in closing that I saw the movie and I didn't think it was bad. I thought that DC almost blew it, but they didn't blow it. I thought that they pulled it out by the skin of their teeth. I thought they made a decent enough movie. There's all sorts of continuity gaps in it. I mean, I think it's hilarious that someone could escape Germany in a World War I biplane and get to, you know, Mascara Island on one tank of gas. I mean, that means it'd have to be like right off the coast, because those planes didn't hold that. They didn't have that kind of distance to go from the middle of Germany out to the middle of the ocean. I mean, that it would have to be close. And I'll turn that off. But yeah, and then when they get on the boat and they leave the island, they're on a sailboat, and it's like they go to sleep, and the next morning they're being towed into the harbor. They hitched a ride with the tug. Well, how far out in the ocean could you have been if you are able to sail to the UK and be tugged into the harbor at the crack of dawn? Here's an island is not only a mythical island because it's covered with Amazons. It occupies this mythical place in space where you can fly to it from Germany on a tank of gas on a World War I biplane, and you can also sail into London in one night on a sailboat. So that would be a real sweet spot. And if such a spot existed, it wouldn't be in water. It would be in dry land halfway in between UK and Germany. But there's all sorts of goofy things like that. I love the mythology of the movie. It's laughable when they say, oh, the Amazons were created to spread love. Really? This group of warrior women, and they're opposed to Ares. They're opposed to the god of war because the Amazons are warrior women, and we all know that warriors don't like war, warriors like love. Yet they're always training with swords and spears and stuff like that. You don't spread love at the point of a spear. You know, I mean, I think if your actual goal was to spread love, you'd be taking